Leah, if you can. Oh. Hi, everyone. My name is Leah Swanberg. I'm the founder of Egg Helpers and Canadian Fertility Consulting, and I'm super excited to be here with Dr. Taylor of Olive Fertility to talk about egg donation, which for me has been a huge part of my life, personally and professionally. My first egg donation was 24 years ago, and my 3 adult kids are subsequently donating now in their young adult lives, and we just are so excited when we are able to support intended parents to make decisions around choosing an egg donor and what that's going to look like as they build their families. So welcome, Dr. Taylor. It is great to have you here. If you want to talk a little bit about your center and you as a doctor, that would be great.
Yeah, Lee, we've known each other for a long time. I think we've been doing egg donation and surrogacy together for like 2 decades.
Yeah.
Close to that, not 2 decades. Yeah, so it's always nice to chat with you and to reach out together and help people. So I'm at Olive Fertility Center, which is based in Vancouver. We also have centers around the province. In Victoria, have a full center, but then a smaller centers in Surrey, Comox, Prince George, and Kelowna. So we're the biggest in BC and one of the biggest in the country. But and we do egg donation and surrogacy. Egg donation will be the focus of this talk. And no better person to kind of talk about this than Leah, really, because she's got the most personal and professional experience in this area. We're going to talk about a few things. We're going to talk about who makes a good egg donor, the pros and cons of the different types of egg donation, which would be known and unknown. We'll talk about the steps in egg donation and a little bit on success rates. So maybe we can start with who makes an ideal egg donor.
I'd love to back up just a tiny bit, because one piece I think we're missing is not all fertility clinics in Canada are created equal in terms of how would someone know, Dr. Taylor, if their clinic can work with egg donors, if they are a primary establishment or if they have the ability to help them.
Right. So technically you can look it up on Health Canada's website to see if they're a primary establishment, which generally means they're able to do egg donation. But most clinics in the country will do some form of egg donation, perhaps known egg donation, and most will do the frozen anonymous egg donation.
Okay.
You can phone the clinic. Even the front receptionist should know if they do it. Larger programs virtually all do it. Smaller ones are the ones where you may want to ask the question.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So yeah, let's get into it. Let's talk about what makes a good egg donor.
So it's pretty obvious who makes an egg donor. Young eggs are better, just like the eggs in your fridge. Young eggs are better than older eggs. Okay. So, but also it's not always equal, because someone who's 30 might be a less ideal egg donor than someone who's 32. So it's not just age, it's also their egg count, which is measured most easily with an AMH level, which is a blood test done anytime in the menstrual cycle. And it will give you a sense of the egg count, because eggs, essentially, they make AMH. So if you have a high AMH, you have lots of eggs. And if you have a low AMH, you don't have as many eggs. So an AMH level should be nice and high. And you can see on the report what high is, but and it's measured in different units. So just if I can take a sidebar to say,
yes,
some labs report it in picomoles and some labs report it in nanograms. And so you do need, it's one of the things you need your high school chemistry here, because you do need to know the unit, because a 3 in picomoles is not very good, but a 3 in nanograms is excellent. So knowing the units, sadly, we have to know that, because every province and every lab is doing something a little different with their units. They're ideally not really obese. Now, that's less important. That comes to more about the safety of the donation, but you really, you don't have to have a BMI under 35 to be an egg donor. It just makes the procedure a little bit easier. And generally the dosing of these very expensive medications we use is a little less if you have a lower BMI, but it's not an absolute rule about that. And healthy with reassuring genetic testing. And I think, Leah, you'll talk a little bit about the genetic testing. And then, of course, features that are important to you in terms of their appearance, also their availability. And if you're getting to know them, some other sort of things that we can't put on a list. But let's jump up to the genetic testing. Leah, do you want to talk about that?
Absolutely. So, all of these points are so important. And when I speak to intended parents about egg donors, they often ask, and so I'll ask you, does it matter if the donor has had her own children yet?
It doesn't matter at all. In fact, I would say, Leah, you would know this. I would say it's probably 50-50 whether they've had children before, maybe even less so. It's not important at all. No.
Okay. And in terms of the BMI and the AMH, as you said, it can be a little bit subjective. And I absolutely agree with that. The right donor may not sort of check all of these
That's
boxes.
right.
And so talking to your fertility doctor about a potential donor, whether it's a sister-in-law, a cousin, a friend, whether it's a donor recruited through an agency, um, you know, the right donor is the right donor. And so
Mhm.
understanding the risks sometimes associated with the right donor who may be 38 and you may
Mhm.
not have as high a chance of success, but the genetic piece is often important.
For
um,
sure.
and in terms of reassuring genetic testing, I think it's really interesting how far that has come. um,
Mhm.
you know 20 years ago it was, they would test you for cystic fibrosis, and that was
Mhm.
kind of the only test. And
That was
now
it. Yeah.
young donors have the opportunity to learn so much about their health through this process, and many of them are so excited to do so. And so the donor will go through genetic testing, and the recipients will go through genetic testing to ensure that there aren't any mutations that are shared that could cause any type of issue together. And I think you could probably explain that better than I just did. But it is really important to look at all of that as well.
Yeah, we're learning this as we go along, but it turns out that most of us humans are carrying a little broken gene. But remember, you've got two copies of every gene, so one broken one doesn't matter, but one broken one or mutated one, so one doesn't really matter. But if you're carrying that, and then the sperm source and the egg source both carry that broken one, then there's a chance, 25% chance, that the baby could have two broken or mutated genes. So egg donors are, it's not mandatory, but it's usually a good idea to have your egg donor screened for these genetic conditions. And as Leah's saying, when we started doing this 20 or so years ago, we were testing for one or two, and now the panels are 400 and 500 gene mutations that are being tested.
Absolutely. And in terms of features that you value, I think it's so individual to people. We have, intended parents who say, I'm looking for, a donor with dark hair and eyes. We'd like our child to look similar to us. And then there are other donors that say, you know, the looks don't matter, but we're looking for someone who shares similar hobbies, and they just feel like that's important. And so if it's important to you, write it down and sort of tuck it away so that when you are reviewing profiles of donors, whether it's through a donor egg, like a frozen egg bank, an agency, or whether you're talking to someone in your social circle about the potential of donating, looking at those pieces and seeing if they're important, high, medium, low, level of importance. I know that, over the years, we've had a lot of people who have said, I'd like the egg donor to have the same blood type as me,
Mhm.
specifically in heterosexual couples. Do you still have that as a request from people?
Not the blood type, not as often. It's funny you say that. It seems, and this is a shift too. I think it's more on looks nowadays than ever before.
Okay.
Don't you
Okay.
think? I find that it's more. I think that
Tall. People want
tall
tall.
with blue. That, you remember that song on social media that was like 6'5" in finance with blue eyes? You remember
Yep.
that little? Yeah, I think that's become a thing. Recognizing that less than 10% of people actually meet those criteria.
Yep.
But yeah, I find it's more on looks, and then the reassuring genetic testing would be mine. But that's just anecdotal. I don't have any.
Absolutely. And I think one other value that's really important here when you're looking at a donor through a bank or through an agency, or even online, there are some places where you can look for donors and they're not sort of identifying who they are, is whether it is important for you to have a known donor. So someone immediately, someone who is open to, an open ID situation when the child reaches age of majority, or whether you are private at this point and wanting to have an anonymous donation. I feel like that value really is so important to get clear on well before you start choosing.
Right. That's a very good point. And that informs too your legal contract too. That kind of thing can come up in a legal contract, which is part of this process, a big part of this process actually.
Absolutely.
Just a sidebar on egg count. AMH is a very good indicator of egg count. I just wanted to mention we also look at an ultrasound of the ovaries, which is a follicle count, because it's good to have two data points. I've seen it where people have kind of a borderline low AMH, but then you do the ultrasound and it's higher, and that could reflect some fluctuation in the menstrual cycle, some hormones that they're on, their health at the time. These things can influence your AMH level. So it is, when someone has a borderline AMH, I wouldn't necessarily rule them out as an egg donor. You probably would benefit from getting a follicle count, which is a vaginal ultrasound done on the egg donor, just to sort of count how many eggs are there. Usually it correlates with AMH, but not always. So sometimes we'll have an egg donor that we're thinking is not going to be good, but then we do the scan and it's better. So a couple of data points for egg count, because that really is the biggest predictor of success, is egg count, or ovarian reserve, as we call it.
And I think as well on that, for intended parents, just not to commit to a donor until this testing has been done, until you have that information, because committing to a donor, maybe having a legal contract or getting too far down the track with her to only find out that she can't participate or that her participating would limit your chances of success. It's really important to have that testing done ahead of time.
And I recognize, and we're really genuinely working hard to cut down barriers to access, but I do know that entering a fertility clinic is not, we don't make it easy for people. I hate to say that out loud. We are working to make it easier for people. But I want you to know that you can get an AMH done by your GP. Any doctor can order your AMH. So you could have an egg donor that and she lives in Saskatoon, and you're like, do you mind going to your family doctor and just getting an AMH done? And that could save you a whole bunch of steps that a fertility clinic requires, because we have to put her in the system, and then we have to create a profile, and then let her know the process, and then do the AMH. But you can save yourself kind of going through our process, and we are trying to figure out a way to help people screen in or out egg donors faster. But as it stands now, why don't you just say, hey, go to your family doctor or go to Rocket or TELUS online and ask for an AMH blood test. And that can really speed things up, because if they have a low AMH, you may want to find a different donor. And if they have a high one, you may want to accelerate the process.
Absolutely.
Now, it's quite important to know, and probably most of you do know, that there's two types of donation in Canada. And that comes from these regulations that Health Canada implemented back in 2020. And they essentially said, look, there's two types of donors. There's someone and then there's someone you don't know. So they called it identified or non-identified egg donors. And when we say know the egg donors, it doesn't mean that it's your sister or your best friend. It means that you've been linked up, perhaps through an agency or social media or something like that. You've connected to the donor, so you have a connection to a person who's going to donate eggs to you. It doesn't mean that you're best friends and texting every day. Known just means that has been some connection, whereas non-identified means these eggs generally have been frozen maybe a year ago at a bank, and you're just obtaining them from the bank or purchasing them from the bank. Now, Leah, this is where I think you have more expertise than I do, but there's pros and cons to both of them. And I've listed here an incomplete list of the pros and cons. But I think the biggest single advantage in my mind to a directed egg donor that you might get through Egg Helpers or from your social network is that you potentially can get a lot of eggs and get siblings. I think that's a big, big advantage to that. And also having the connection with that, you might one day want the child to know their egg donor or meet them or learn more about them. So I think those are the two big advantages, but I've kind of listed it to generate a bit of a conversation around the pros and cons of both on the slide here.
And I think that, for some people, time is very important. I think for some people, they have such a diverse background that finding an egg donor through a known system, whether it's an agency or social circle, may be very difficult. And so for people in that situation, banked eggs or eggs, procured from a bank in the US or in Canada often will make sense. If
Mhm.
we're looking at um, a known donor, it really is about having enough time, having time to have your donor go through an IVF cycle, having your donor meet with your doctor and the counselor at your clinic and having a legal agreement. And it's interesting because all of this sort of research says that it's really important for kids to have information about where they come from, and so they can have that information if they have access to it. And the majority of egg banks, they are anonymous, they are
Mhm.
unknown donors, and so that access point isn't available. And so it's really, you know for some people, time is more important. Having a donor that fits their diverse background is more important. But it really is such a personal decision. And so we really, you know, as an agency, understand all parties. I will say, if you do happen to find the right donor, she may have identified herself as a known donor only. And then you are going to be having to make that decision. Am I interested in
Mhm.
working with a known donor? Am I okay with, the level of contact that this donor would like to have, with any future children that result? And if that donor has children and she's wanting a relationship between the kids, and not every egg results in a live birth, and so it's really important to understand that as well. And so I think that as you're deciding on an egg donor, it's really important that, sorry, my kids are singing outside the door. I'll just be one moment.
Yeah, it's neat to have that personal connection for sure. And then the frozen eggs, which are the non-identified eggs, as Leah said, they're readily available, and some of them do offer a guaranteed live birth, which has some appeal as well, right? You pay them big money, about
Yep.
45,000 US, and they will keep giving you eggs until you have a baby, or you get to typically 5 or 6 batches of eggs, and then they'll stop and give you a partial refund. So that might be an advantage as well for some people going into a process. I find the heterosexual couple who have been honestly beaten down by years of lack of success with their own eggs, that group often, and as Leah was saying, the ones who need sort of a ethnically unique donor, those two groups benefit, especially the guaranteed live birth. If you go into a program and you feel, okay, well, we're gonna come out of this with a baby, sometimes for certainly heterosexual couples who have had a really rough go, that's not a bad idea too.
And our or my advice always is to take yourself with you with whatever process you go through. And so if you're working with a known egg donor, or you're working with an open ID donor, having a legal contract that's really clear around the process. If
Mhm.
you are working with banked eggs, even if the egg bank doesn't sort of require a legal agreement, asking them like, hey, I want to have a few things down on paper, whether it's that, with that bank, I could go back for sibling, our eggs held back, for recipients who have been successful. Really, um, while this is the most personal and intimate experience, um, it's also really important that you're able to take your patient hat off, and put on your consumer hat to
Mhm.
really ensure that you are, sorry, everyone is so loud right outside this door. That as you're putting your consumer hat on, that you are able to really look at what makes sense financially, what makes sense from a psychosocial perspective in terms of, you know, how you are going to share this with your children, and if what you're doing now makes sense, for you to be able to do that in the future. Um,
Well said. Um, Can I jump to the
Yeah,
process a bit?
please do.
So, first thing, as I said, that AMH is really an important first step, and then you go to a clinic, and that's when I would speak to the egg donor, review their AMH, arrange the ultrasound, go through their genetic testing and their medical history and family histories, and then sort of deem them as a good candidate or not. And most of the time, people are good candidates if they've got a reasonable AMH and they're otherwise healthy, as I said earlier. I created this slide with ChatGPT, and I was saying to Leah, they've spelled ultrasound wrong. They put a needle at the end of the ultrasound probe, and they've indicated that eggs are extracted from the uterus. So anyway, pretty funny. But how it goes is blood work, physician consult, ultrasound, and then we do ovarian stimulation, where the egg donor would take injections morning and night, typically for around 10 days. And then an egg retrieval procedure is performed, where we go through the vagina and suction out the eggs that they were able to grow over those 10 or 11 days of shots. And then the egg donor is done at that stage. The eggs are now yours. And they're typically fertilized right away with sperm to make embryos that would be usually tested and then frozen, or just frozen for your use. So this process, depending, can take, 2, 3, 4 months, really depending on how things go and how quickly they can get in for an ultrasound and things like that. But it would be, if you put your head around a 3 or 4 month process, that's probably fair from when we first get that AMH level done. Success rates. So at our center in 2025, from directed or known egg donors, we did a total of 83 embryo transfers, and 60% of those pregnancies are ongoing. And I think that's a little better than the national average, but these are numbers that, they do fluctuate, but we're pretty steady the last 10 years with these kind of numbers. So what I want people to take away from this slide is that when you put an embryo in, it doesn't always make a baby. You might need more than one embryo transfer, because it only makes a baby about 60-ish% of the time. So it might take more than one, which is the advantage of having that high AMH, because if you've got high AMH, you'll probably have multiple embryos, so you can keep trying to get that baby. This is generally single embryos. And this is a mix of tested PGT, pre-implantation genetic tested embryos, and not. So this is kind of dirty data, but it gives you just that rough sense, so I could convey to people that, hey, this is the kind of volume a clinic like us does, and this is the kind of pregnancy rate you might expect per embryo transfer. We do a similar number, actually, maybe a little bit more, of the frozen non-identified eggs, and they have a pretty similar pregnancy rate, not quite as high, but in that ballpark. So no matter where the eggs are coming from, the embryos resulting, that generally have about little better than a coin toss for a pregnancy rate. When it doesn't work, it may be the embryo, it may be the uterus, but it is really biology, and there is a limit to biology that we're trying to push, and we've been pushing that number up, but it's been in the 60s for a live birth rate per embryo transfer for a while now. So until the next big leap in science, that's where we'll sit.
And as I'm looking through, choosing a known egg donor, choosing an anonymous group of banked eggs, when you're looking at that and you're looking at how people are going to achieve success, is your goal that people speak to you based on their personal situation in order to decide what is best for them from like a medical perspective? Or how would you suggest people decide on, how to move forward with egg donation, whether it be a known donor or a fresh egg donation versus banked eggs?
Yeah, a lot of people, when they first consult with me, they're kind of wide open to which one they want. Some people have strong feelings about whether they want directed or not. But a lot of people, I would say, look, you should put your first choice as a directed egg donor if you can find them, because of the advantage of potentially full siblings, more eggs, fresh eggs. And that advantage of having a connection to the person. So I usually say, look, if you're going to rank them, try to get fresh eggs first from a known egg donor, or we call it a directed egg donor. So that would be where I would sway people. A lot of people have certain values where they like the arm's length nature of frozen eggs from a bank in Georgia. They like that distance, and others like that more intimacy with their donor. So I find and I think that reflects in the numbers. It's almost 50-50 what people want. But I think if I was swaying people, I would go with directed option.
And one last question on that. With the VC funding, and just as of today, like this isn't sort of like promise for future, are people able to utilize an egg donor in a funded cycle?
The short answer is yes, if the egg donor is in BC with coverage, if they're also an MSP egg donor.
Okay.
So that's a clear one. That's clear.
Okay.
Now, and that is straightforward. No issues there. Now, you also can use the funding if your egg donor is not, but it goes through an exceptional access program. So it's a little bit slower, but you can, as long as the egg donor, of course, is under age 42, you can use donated eggs and apply for funding. But it is under an exceptional access thing. So it's a little more paperwork, a little bit slower to get, but it can be done in both scenarios. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you.
Cost of egg donation on the clinic side. So there's screening, there's IVF, and that's a ballpark for IVF. I've made the numbers a little bit high, to be honest with you, because if you've got a 28-year-old egg donor, they don't need very much medication, so it wouldn't come up at $22,000. But let's have sticker shock here, and we'll just put the upper level for clinic fees. So that's what it would cost for a directed egg donor. And then from the banks, it's roughly, and these are in US dollars because the banks are in the US for frozen eggs. Single egg lot, 22,000. That gives you about a 60-70% chance of a baby. And then the guaranteed live birth that I mentioned. So, certainly clinic fees are in the $30,000 range, and then you're going to have agency and egg donor fees and other fees associated with that. But that's on the clinic side of things. So I hope what we've conveyed is that young women with a high AMH make good egg donors. There's pros and cons to different types. Think about it. Talk to your partner if you have one. And then the clinics will also provide you information on both types. And it is really successful. We have a lot of babies from egg donation. It's a very successful program because the egg age is the single biggest predictor of IVF success. And when you're dealing with young, healthy egg donors, you're highly successful. But persistence is necessary in every domain of fertility. And that also includes egg donation. Persistence will pay off.
Absolutely, I agree. And many of our clients have accessed egg donors through Egg Helpers, our program, but also, friends and family and or family of their partner, I should say. And so much has changed over the years. But the one thing that I know for sure hasn't changed is the willingness of amazing young women coming forward to help people build their families. And I'm just absolutely blown away every time I'm able to connect with a donor and learn about, their experience of donating and, what they learned about their own health and, how it may have shifted whether or not they want to have children in the future or, many other things. So I really appreciate just the amazing approach that you take, Dr. Taylor, and that Olive takes, and donor safety being so important. And, for intended parents who are looking at, wanting to go through this process and wanting to do it ethically and safely for the donor, really talking to your clinic, I would say is sort of my last piece of information would be ask your clinic how they take care of their egg donors, because taking care of your egg donor is really ultimately taking care of your future child and is so important. So thank you, Dr. Taylor. And I look forward to another catch up soon. And thanks.
Yeah. Thanks for your time. Okay.
Bye.